The melody, a simple, almost lullaby-like tune, drifted through the cacophony of the bustling city park, a fragile thread of sound against the tapestry of children's laughter, distant traffic, and the rustle of autumn leaves. Arthur Vance, a man for whom the world usually muted itself, a man insulated by wealth and the self-imposed solitude of grief, froze mid-stride, his hand, holding a leather-bound first edition of The Little Prince, trembled almost imperceptibly. It couldn't be. The song was a ghost, a half-forgotten echo from a life he had buried 6 years ago, under layers of regret and expensive distractions. It was their song, a silly little ditty he had composed on a toy piano for his daughter Lily when she was just a toddler. It had no name, no lyrics beyond the la-la-las she'd hummed, and no existence outside the sun-drenched nursery of their former home. He had never played it for anyone else. Lily had never sung it for anyone else. And Lily was gone. The police report had called it a kidnapping, a ransom note that never came, a case grown so cold it was perpetually frozen at the bottom of a detective's filing cabinet. Yet the song was here, clear as a bell, weaving through the late afternoon air. Arthur's head snapped up, his sharp blue eyes, usually clouded with a detached weariness, now blazing with a desperate, impossible hope. He scanned the playground, his gaze sweeping past nannies pushing swings and fathers coaching t-ball. And then he saw her, a small girl, no older than 7, sitting on a bench near the fountain, her small legs kicking rhythmically against the weathered wood. She was alone, sketching in a worn notebook, and humming his Lily's song. For a moment, the world tilted on its axis, the sounds of the park fading into a dull roar, leaving only the child and her impossible melody. Arthur took a step, then another, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. Where did you hear that song? The words were out before he could stop them, rough and desperate, startling the girl and making a nearby pigeon take flight. The little girl looked up, her wide hazel eyes, so jarringly familiar, blinking at him in surprise, the humming cut short. A crayon, the color of a summer sky, slipped from her small fingers and rolled to a stop at the tip of his polished Italian leather shoe. The little girl's eyes, the color of warm honey swirled with green, widened further, a flicker of fear in their depths. She clutched her drawing pad to her chest like a shield. Arthur instantly regretted his abruptness. He was a stranger, a tall, imposing man, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her family's monthly rent. He looked like the kind of person parents warned their children about. He took a deep, steadying breath, forcing himself to soften his expression, to dial back the raw, frantic energy that had propelled him across the manicured lawn. He knelt, a gesture that felt foreign and creaky in his expensive trousers, and picked up the fallen crayon. He held it out to her on his open palm, trying for a gentle, reassuring smile. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice now a low, soft baritone. "I didn't mean to scare you. It's just that song. It's a very pretty song. I haven't heard it in a long, long time." The girl watched him, her gaze flicking from his face to the crayon and back again. She didn't take it. Her small brow was furrowed in concentration, a tiny vertical line appearing between her eyebrows that sent another jolt through Arthur's heart. Lily used to do that when she was trying to figure something out. "My mommy sings it," the girl said finally, her voice small but clear. "She sings it to me before I go to sleep." Arthur's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. Her mommy, a woman he had never met, was singing his daughter's song. How? The question hammered in his skull. Your mommy? He echoed, keeping his voice even with a monumental effort. Does she have a name? The girl hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. She looked around the park, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, she stated, reciting a well-learned rule. That's a very good rule, Arthur agreed immediately, nodding. Your mommy is very smart. But I'm not a stranger, not really. I mean, my name is Arthur. See? He pointed to the monogram on his briefcase, which he'd set down beside him. A.V. Arthur Vance. He was grasping at straws, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. The girl glanced at the briefcase but seemed unimpressed. Her attention was drawn back to his face. She tilted her head, a curious look replacing the fear. Your eyes are sad, she said with the unfiltered honesty of a child. The observation struck him with the force of a physical blow. No one had said that to him in years. His employees, his business partners, the women he occasionally dated, they all saw the power, the wealth, the success. They saw the carefully maintained facade. No one saw the sadness. But this little girl, this stranger humming a ghost of a melody, saw it clear as day. Yes, he admitted, his voice thick. They are. Just then, a woman's voice cut through the air, sharp with worry. Molly, there you are. I told you not to wander off. A young woman was hurrying toward them, her face a mixture of relief and admonishment. She was slender, with a cascade of dark, wavy hair, pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore faded jeans and a simple T-shirt, and her brow was creased with concern. As she got closer, Arthur saw that she was beautiful, but in a weary, careworn way. There were faint shadows under her eyes that were the exact shade of hazel as the little girl's. Molly's mother, the woman who sang the song. The woman's gaze fell on Arthur, kneeling in front of her daughter, and her expression immediately hardened. She quickened her pace, scooping Molly into a fierce, protective hug. Are you okay, sweetie? Did this man bother you? She asked, her voice low and suspicious, her body a physical barrier between her child and the stranger. He's sad, Mommy, Molly whispered, pointing a small finger at Arthur. And he knows our sleepy song. The woman's eyes snapped back to Arthur, a new, more complex emotion swirling in their depths, confusion, suspicion, and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Fear. Who are you? She demanded, her voice trembling slightly. Arthur slowly rose to his feet, his mind racing. He had to handle this carefully. He couldn't afford to frighten her away. Not now. Not when he was this close to something he didn't even dare to name. My name is Arthur Vance, he said, keeping his hands open and visible. I apologize if I frightened you. Your daughter. She was humming a song that is very important to me. I had to ask where she heard it. The woman, Molly's mother, tightened her grip on her daughter. She studied him, her eyes narrowed. He could see the protective instinct warring with a flicker of curiosity. It's just a lullaby, she said, her tone defensive. I made it up for her. Arthur's heart sank. She made it up. It was impossible. A coincidence. A cruel cosmic joke that had him chasing ghosts in a public park. But then he looked at Molly, at the way she tilted her head, the furrow in her brow, the impossible familiarity of her gaze. He couldn't let it go. Forgive me, he said, his voice earnest, pleading, but that can't be true. I composed that melody. For my daughter. Years ago." The woman's face paled. She took a step back, pulling Molly with her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to go." She turned to leave, but Arthur couldn't let her. Not yet. "Please," he called after her, his voice cracking with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Just 5 minutes, please. My daughter." Her name was Lily. At the name, the woman stopped dead in her tracks. Her back was to him, but he saw her shoulders tense, her body go rigid. She didn't turn around. After a long, agonizing moment, she spoke, her voice so low he could barely hear it. "My name is Sarah, and I don't know anyone named Lily." She then scooped Molly into her arms and walked away, almost running, without a single backward glance, leaving Arthur Vance standing alone by the fountain, the sky-blue crayon still clutched in his hand, his world once again silent, save for the frantic, hopeful, terrified beating of his own heart. Arthur stood frozen for a long time, the hurried retreat of Sarah and Molly, leaving a void in the bustling park. The world, which for a few surreal minutes had sharpened into a single focused point of impossible possibility, now blurred back into its mundane chaos. He was just a man in a park, a ghost at a feast of life he could no longer taste. He had their names, Sarah and Molly. It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in 6 years. He walked back to his waiting car, the chauffeur holding the door open with practiced impassivity. Arthur sank into the plush leather, the scent of which usually soothed him, but today it felt suffocating. "The office, Mr. Vance?" the driver asked through the intercom. "No, Henry," Arthur replied, his voice distant. "Take me home. And Henry, I need you to find someone for me." He had the best private investigator money could buy on his payroll, a man named Gavin Flint, who had been instrumental in the initial frantic search for Lily. Flint was discreet, efficient, and relentless. Arthur had kept him on a retainer for years, a futile bastion against the encroaching silence, having him chase down every crackpot psychic's vision and every false lead that surfaced. Most of the time, Flint's reports were a sterile confirmation of nothing. This time felt different. He gave Flint the names, the vague description of a young woman and a 7-year-old girl, and the location, Central Park, near the Hans Christian Andersen statue. It was a needle in a haystack, but it was a haystack Arthur was willing to burn to the ground to find what he was looking for. The days that followed were a special kind of torment. Arthur went through the motions of his life: board meetings, charity dinners, the hollow routine of a man who had everything and nothing. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene in the park, dissecting every word, every glance. The way Molly tilted her head, the sad, wary eyes of her mother, the impossible song. He found himself humming it under his breath, the simple notes a painful counterpoint to the silence of his vast, empty penthouse. He started visiting the park every afternoon, sitting on the same bench, a book open on his lap, unread. He told himself it was foolish, that they were long gone, that he was chasing a phantom born of grief. But he couldn't stay away. It was a compulsion, a magnetic pull he was powerless to resist. He saw them a week later. It was a Tuesday, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. His heart leaped into his throat. Sarah and Molly were by the duckle pond, tossing breadcrumbs to the eager mallards. Molly was laughing, a bright, silvery sound that carried across the water. Sarah was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed her face, erasing some of the weariness and letting her youthful beauty shine through. Arthur stayed where he was, hidden behind the sprawling branches of an old oak tree. He just watched, a silent observer, on the periphery of their lives. He couldn't risk scaring them off again. He needed a different approach. Flint's report came the next day. It was concise, as always. Sarah Jensen, 28 years old. No criminal record. Worked as a freelance graphic designer from a small walk-up apartment in a modest neighborhood on the Upper West Side. Her daughter, Molly Jensen, was 6, soon to be 7. According to her birth certificate, her father was listed as unknown. They had moved to New York from a small town in Oregon 2 years ago. There was no mention of a Lily Vance, no connection to the kidnapping, nothing to explain the song. It was a dead end. But Arthur knew it wasn't. The song was the key. He just didn't know what lock it opened. He decided to change his tactics. The direct approach had failed. He needed to find a way into their lives, to earn their trust, to understand the mystery of the melody. His opportunity came in an unexpected form. Flint's report had included details of Sarah's freelance work, including a link to her online portfolio. Her designs were clean, creative, and professional. She was talented. Vance Industries, his sprawling multinational corporation, was in the process of a major rebranding campaign for one of its subsidiary philanthropic foundations. The foundation's focus? Supporting underprivileged children with access to arts education. It was perfect. He instructed his marketing department to reach out to a list of freelance designers for a new logo and branding package. He made sure Sarah Jensen's name was at the top of that list. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her a lifeline, a way to observe her, to get closer, without revealing his true, desperate intentions. Sarah, unaware of the machinations behind the offer, was ecstatic. A contract with a Vance Industries foundation was a huge opportunity, the kind of project that could elevate her career and provide some much-needed financial stability. She accepted the initial consultation meeting without hesitation. The meeting was to be held at the foundation's office, a sleek, modern space in Midtown. Arthur arranged to be there, ostensibly to give his final approval on the creative direction. He wanted to see her again, to speak with her in a professional setting, to gauge her reaction to him away from the charged atmosphere of the park. When she walked into the conference room, she looked different. She wore a simple but professional black dress. Her dark hair was styled, and she carried a portfolio case. The weary defensiveness was gone, replaced by a nervous but determined professionalism. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him at the head of the table. He saw the flicker of recognition, the immediate tensing of her shoulders. He stood up, extending a hand, his expression carefully neutral. "Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice calm and even. "Thank you for coming in. I'm Arthur Vance. I believe we met, briefly, in the park." Sarah's handshake was hesitant, her palm cool. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice tight. "Yes, I remember." The foundation's director, a warm, capable woman named Eleanor, quickly steered the conversation to business, and Sarah, to her credit, was a consummate professional. She presented her initial concepts with poise and intelligence, her passion for her work evident in every word. Arthur listened, impressed, but his mind was on other things. He was watching her, studying the way she talked with her hands, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, searching for any flicker. any hint of something that would connect her to his past. There was nothing. She was a stranger, a talented, beautiful stranger who just happened to sing a song she shouldn't know. As the meeting concluded, Arthur made a decision. "Your work is very impressive, Ms. Jensen," he said, his tone one of genuine admiration. "I have a personal project, separate from the foundation, that I believe you would be perfect for. If you're interested, of course." Sarah looked surprised and a little wary. "A personal project?" "Yes," Arthur continued smoothly. "I'm looking to commission a series of illustrations for a children's book, a story I wrote a long time ago. It's very dear to me." It was a lie, but a plausible one, and it would give him a reason to meet with her one-on-one, away from the corporate environment, to talk to her, to get to know her, and, by extension, Molly. "The story's about a little girl," he added, his gaze holding hers, "who gets lost and has to find her way home." The bait was cast. He watched her face, searching for a reaction. For a moment he saw something flicker in her hazel eyes. A shadow of pain, a hint of a memory. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a professional mask. "I'd be happy to discuss it with you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice carefully neutral. They agreed to meet the following week at a quiet cafe near her apartment. As she left the conference room, Arthur felt a renewed surge of determination. He was playing a dangerous game, weaving a web of deception around a woman and a child who had done nothing to deserve it. But the need to know, the desperate, gnawing hope that had taken root in his heart, was too powerful to ignore. He had to know the truth about the song, even if it shattered the fragile peace he had built for himself in the ruins of his former life, even if it destroyed him. The cafe was a small, cozy place with mismatched chairs and the comforting aroma of coffee and baked goods. Arthur arrived early, choosing a quiet table in the corner that offered a clear view of the entrance. He felt a nervous energy he hadn't experienced in years, a jittery anticipation that was both exhilarating and terrifying. When Sarah walked in, she was dressed casually in jeans and a soft gray sweater. She looked younger, more approachable than she had in the sterile conference room. She spotted him and gave a small, hesitant smile as she approached the table. "Mr. Vance," she said, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Please, call me Arthur," he insisted, offering a smile of his own. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," she replied, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I'm intrigued by your project." He had spent the past few days concocting a plausible story, a simple narrative about a lost princess in a magical forest. He sketched out the basic plot, trying to sound like an amateur writer, a grieving father dabbling in a creative outlet. Sarah listened intently, her head tilted, her expression thoughtful. She asked intelligent questions about the character, the tone, the visual style he envisioned. She was a true professional, completely focused on the work. But Arthur was looking for more than a professional collaboration. He needed a personal connection. He steered the conversation away from the fictional princess. "So," he began, trying to sound casual, "you have a daughter. Molly, is that right? She seems like a wonderful little girl." Sarah's posture stiffened slightly. The professional mask slipped back into place. "Yes, she's everything to me." "I can imagine," Arthur said softly. "I had a daughter once. Her name was Lily." He watched her face carefully, but there was no flicker of recognition, only a polite, sympathetic sadness. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice gentle. That must be incredibly difficult. It is, he admitted, the simple words carrying the weight of years of unspoken grief. Every day. He decided to take a risk, to nudge the conversation closer to the heart of the matter. The song Molly was humming in the park. I wrote it for Lily, when she was very small. He held her gaze, silently pleading with her to give him something, anything. Sarah looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. She was silent for a long moment. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clouded with an emotion he couldn't read. "Arthur," she said, her voice low and steady, "I don't know how your daughter's song and my daughter's lullaby can be the same. I truly don't. When I was younger, I went through a very difficult time. I lost a lot of my memories from a certain period. A trauma-induced amnesia, the doctors called it." Arthur stared at her, his heart beginning to pound. Amnesia? What kind of trauma? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah shook her head, a shadow passing over her face. "I don't like to talk about it. It was a long time ago. All I know is that when I came out of it, I had Molly, and I had this song in my head. It was just there. It felt like a part of me, a connection to a past I couldn't remember. I've been singing it to her ever since she was born." The pieces began to click into place, sharp and painful. A young woman, a traumatic event, lost memories, a baby, and a song. Could it be possible? Could Sarah have been involved in Lily's kidnapping? Was she a victim, or something else entirely? The implications were staggering, a labyrinth of terrifying possibilities. He had to know more. "Sarah," he said, leaning forward, his voice urgent, "this is incredibly important. When was this? When did this trauma happen?" She flinched at his intensity. "About 6 years ago," she said reluctantly. "Why?" 6 years ago. The exact time Lily had disappeared. The air in the cafe suddenly felt thick, heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken secrets. Arthur felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. This was it. This was the connection. He didn't know how, but this woman, this stranger with the sad eyes and the beautiful broken past, held the key to everything. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling with the effort of holding himself together, "I need you to tell me everything you can remember. Please. It might be the most important thing in the world." Sarah looked at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. She was beginning to understand that their meeting was no coincidence, that the man sitting across from her was not just a potential client, but a figure from a past she couldn't remember, a past that was now rushing forward to meet her. The project, the children's book, became their official reason for meeting. They met twice a week, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes at a quiet corner of the library, and once, when a deadline was looming, at her small, cluttered apartment. Arthur was always the perfect gentleman, the respectful client. But every meeting was a carefully orchestrated dance, a delicate interrogation, disguised as a creative collaboration. He would ask about her past, her childhood in Oregon, her dreams before she came to New York. He learned that she was an orphan, raised by a kind but distant aunt. She had been a wild, artistic teenager, prone to wanderlust. Then there was the blank space. A period of about 6 months, 6 years ago. That was a complete void. Her memory picked up in a small private hospital in Portland, with no recollection of how she got there. She had been found wandering on a rural road, disoriented and pregnant. The hospital staff had been kind, but they had no answers for her. She had no ID, no memory of her own name. They had called her Jane Doe. It was only after Molly was born that a name surfaced in her fractured mind. Sarah. She had clung to it, built a new life around it. The song was the only other fragment she had from that lost time. As he listened to her story, a new, more compassionate theory began to form in Arthur's mind. What if Sarah wasn't a kidnapper, but another victim? What if she and Lily had been taken together? What if, in the trauma of the event, she had lost her memory and somehow ended up with his daughter, raising her as her own? It seemed fantastical, like the plot of a melodramatic novel. But the alternative, that this gentle, loving mother was a willing participant in the crime that had shattered his life, was too monstrous to contemplate. His focus shifted from interrogation to observation. He needed to get closer to Molly. He started bringing small gifts to their meetings: a new set of drawing pencils, a book of fairy tales, a small, beautifully crafted wooden bird. "For your daughter," he would say casually. "I saw it and thought of her." Sarah was hesitant at first, but Molly was enthralled. She would thank him with a shy smile, her hazel eyes lighting up. Arthur cherished those small moments, the brief flashes of connection. He saw so much of Lily in her, the way she chewed on her lip when she was concentrating on a drawing, the way she would narrate her own imaginary games in a soft, continuous whisper. The similarities were both a comfort and a torment. One rainy afternoon, Sarah called him in a panic. Her regular babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and she had a crucial deadline for another client. "I know this is a huge imposition, Mr. Vance." "Arthur," she said, her voice fraught with anxiety, "but would it be possible for you to watch Molly? Just for an hour or two? I wouldn't ask, but I'm desperate." Arthur's heart leaped. "Of course," he said, his voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. "I would be happy to." He went to their apartment, a place that was small, but filled with a warmth and love that his own opulent penthouse so conspicuously lacked. Molly's drawings were taped to the walls, and the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. Sarah gave him a list of instructions, her anxiety palpable. "She's a good girl," she said, hovering by the door. "She'll probably just draw. Her favorite snack is apple slices. The TV remote is." "Sarah," Arthur interrupted gently, "it will be fine. We'll be fine. Go. Meet your deadline." She gave him a grateful, watery smile and rushed out. And then he was alone with the little girl who might be his daughter. Molly was shy at first, hiding behind the worn armchair in the living room. Arthur didn't push. He sat on the floor, took out the children's book manuscript they were supposedly working on, and began to read it aloud in a soft, gentle voice. After a few minutes, he heard a small rustle, and Molly peeked out from behind the chair. "That's a good story," she whispered. "Do you think so?" Arthur asked, looking up with a smile. "I'm glad. Maybe you can help me with it. The princess in the story. What color do you think her dress should be?" Molly crept out from her hiding place and sat cross-legged on the floor opposite him. "Yellow," she said decisively. "Like a daffodil." They spent the next hour talking about the story, Molly offering her surprisingly insightful suggestions. She was bright, imaginative, and funny. Being with her felt so natural, so right. He felt a part of himself, a part he thought had died with Lily, slowly coming back to life. He was making her a snack of apple slices in the small kitchen when he saw it. Tucked away on a high shelf, covered in a thin layer of dust, was a small, worn, stuffed rabbit. It was gray, with one ear flopped over and a missing button eye. His breath caught in his throat. It couldn't be. He reached up, his hand trembling, and took it down. He turned it over. There, stitched into the faded velvet of its paw, in his late wife's clumsy embroidery, were the initials L.V. Lily Vance. It was Patches, Lily's favorite toy, the one she had been holding the day she was taken. He sank into a kitchen chair, the stuffed rabbit clutched in his hand, the world spinning around him. Molly came into the kitchen, munching on an apple slice. "That's my mommy's sleepy bunny," she said, pointing at the toy. "She says she doesn't remember where she got it, but it helps her when she has bad dreams." Arthur looked from the worn rabbit to the little girl's face, her innocent hazel eyes so full of life. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sarah wasn't a kidnapper. She was a victim, just like Lily. And Molly was his daughter. She was Lily. The realization washed over him, a tidal wave of joy, grief, and a fierce, protective love that took his breath away. His little girl was alive. She was here, she was safe, and he had found her. He didn't know how he was going to tell Sarah, how he was going to navigate the impossible, delicate situation that lay before them. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the little girl standing in front of him, and the battered, one-eyed rabbit that had finally, after 6 long years, brought her home. When Sarah returned, flushed and apologetic, she found Arthur sitting quietly on the sofa, Molly asleep with her head in his lap. He was stroking her hair, a look of such profound, tender adoration on his face that it made Sarah pause in the doorway. "I'm so sorry I took so long," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "She was no trouble at all," Arthur said, his own voice thick with emotion. He didn't look up, afraid that his eyes would betray the cataclysmic shift that had occurred within him. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. Not like this. It would shatter her world, the fragile, carefully constructed life she had built for herself and her daughter. The revelation had to be handled with surgical precision, with a delicacy he wasn't sure he possessed. He needed proof, something more than a father's desperate hope and a worn-out stuffed animal. He needed Gavin Flint. The next day, Arthur met his private investigator in a sterile, anonymous coffee shop, far from his usual haunts. He placed the stuffed rabbit on the table between them. "I need you to run a DNA test," Arthur said, his voice low and urgent. "Discreetly, I have a hair from the child's hairbrush. I need to know for certain." Flint, a man not easily surprised, raised an eyebrow but asked no questions. He simply took the rabbit and a small evidence bag containing the single strand of dark hair Arthur had carefully retrieved from Molly's brush. "It'll take a few days," Flint said. Those few days were the longest of Arthur's life. He continued his meetings with Sarah, the children's book a flimsy pretext for his need to be near them. The knowledge he now held made every interaction a tightrope walk. He watched Molly, memorizing the shape of her hands, the sound of her laughter, the way she wrinkled her nose when she didn't like something. He was a father studying his child, trying to reclaim 6 years of lost moments in a few stolen hours. He saw the world through new eyes. The city, which had once been a gray, meaningless landscape, was now vibrant with possibility. The future, which had been a bleak, empty expanse, was now a horizon brimming with a terrifying, beautiful light. He was going to be a father again. He had to be. During one of their meetings, Sarah seemed more withdrawn than usual. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled as she held her sketchbook. "Are you all right?" Arthur asked gently. She shook her head, giving him a weak, tired smile. "Just bad dreams," she said vaguely. "They've been getting worse lately. Fragments. Like a movie with half the scenes missing. A dark room. A woman's voice, not a kind one. And a little girl crying." Arthur's blood ran cold. "What else?" he pressed, trying to keep his voice calm. "A song," she whispered, her eyes wide and haunted. "Our song. But it's different. It's sad. And it's not me singing it." Her fragmented memories, stirred by his presence in her life, were beginning to surface. The past was no longer dormant. It was clawing its way into the present. The call from Flint came on a Friday afternoon. Arthur was in his office, staring out at the city skyline, when his private line buzzed. He snatched it up. "Tell me," he commanded, his voice tight. "It's a match, Arthur," Flint said, his tone carefully neutral, but with an undercurrent of something that sounded like awe. 99.9% certainty. The girl, Molly Jensen, is your daughter, Lily Vance." The receiver slipped from Arthur's fingers, clattering onto the polished mahogany of his desk. He sank into his chair, a wave of profound, earth-shattering relief washing over him, so potent it felt like grief. Tears streamed down his face, hot and silent, the first he had shed in 6 years. Lily, his Lily was alive. He now had the proof. But the proof was a weapon, one that could either heal or destroy. He knew he had to tell Sarah, and he had to do it now, before her own fractured memories tore her apart. He called her, his voice still shaky, and asked her to meet him. "It's important," he said. "It's about the book. It's about everything." They met in the park, on the same bench where he had first seen Molly. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. Sarah approached him cautiously, a worried frown on her face. "Arthur, what's wrong? You sound—" "Sarah," he began, his heart pounding. He took her hands in his. They were cold. "What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to listen, and I need you to believe me." He told her everything. He told her about Lily, about the kidnapping, about the 6 years of searching. He told her about the song, about the uncanny resemblance, about his suspicions. And then gently, he took the stuffed rabbit from his briefcase and placed it in her lap. "Do you remember this?" he asked softly. Sarah stared at the rabbit, her breath hitching. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the flopped-over ear. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "My sleepy bunny," she whispered. And then he told her about the DNA test. He watched as a storm of emotions washed over her face. Disbelief, confusion, fear, and finally, a dawning, horrified recognition. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, it can't be. Molly is my daughter. I gave birth to her. Her voice broke, and she began to sob, deep, wrenching sobs of a woman whose entire reality was disintegrating. Arthur moved closer, putting a comforting arm around her shaking shoulders. "You did give birth to her, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with a compassion that surprised him. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. You were pregnant when you were taken. You must have been. And in the trauma of it all, your memory. It protected you. It erased the horror, but it left you with the 2 most important things: your baby, and the song you sang to her. The pieces were falling into place for both of them. A new narrative was emerging from the fog of the past. Someone had kidnapped a pregnant young woman and a wealthy man's child. Why? The motive was still a mystery, but the truth of what had happened was becoming terrifyingly clear. But who would do that? Sarah asked, her voice choked with tears. And why? Arthur didn't have the answer to that yet, but he knew who could find it. Gavin Flint was already working on it, digging into the cold case file, looking for connections, for anything that might link the two abductions. For now, there was a more immediate, more delicate matter to address. There's someone who wants to meet you, Arthur said gently. Someone who has been waiting for you for a very long time. He led her out of the park and to his waiting car. They drove in silence, the city lights a blur outside the window. Sarah clutched the stuffed rabbit to her chest, her face pale and tear-streaked. The car pulled up in front of a stately brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. An elderly woman with kind, worried eyes opened the door before they even reached it. "Arthur," she said, her voice trembling. "This is Sarah," Arthur said, his voice gentle. "And this," he said, turning to Sarah, "is Eleanor Vance, my mother, Lily's grandmother." Eleanor looked at Sarah, her eyes filling with tears. She saw the resemblance now, the same hazel eyes, the same determined set of her jaw. She opened her arms, and without a word, Sarah stepped into her embrace. The embrace of a mother she had never known, a family she never knew she had. The story was far from over. There were still villains in the shadows, still questions that demanded answers. But in that moment, in the warm glow of the hallway, a mother and daughter, separated by a terrible crime, were reunited. And upstairs, sleeping peacefully in a room that had been waiting for her for 6 long years, was a little girl named Lily, who would soon learn that she had a father who had never stopped looking for her, and a whole family that was ready to welcome her home. The truth, when it finally unspooled, was darker and more twisted than Arthur could have imagined. Gavin Flint, with the full resources of Vance Industries at his disposal, reopened the cold case with a vengeance. He discovered that the small private hospital in Portland, where Sarah had been treated, had a new owner. The previous owner had declared bankruptcy and disappeared 6 years ago, right around the time of the kidnappings. Digging deeper, Flint uncovered a name: Martha Jennings, a former head nurse at the hospital. Her employment had been terminated a few months before the hospital went under. A background check revealed a chilling connection. Martha Jennings was the estranged sister of Arthur's former head of security, a man named Frank Miller, whom Arthur had fired for gross negligence a month before Lily's disappearance. The motive, it turned out, was a bitter, venomous revenge. Frank, blaming Arthur for his financial ruin and public humiliation, had concocted a plan to inflict the ultimate pain on his former employer, to take the thing he loved most. He had learned through his security connections that Arthur had a secret, a daughter from a brief, youthful relationship who had been given up for adoption, Sarah. In his twisted mind, a plan formed. He would take both of Arthur's daughters, the one he cherished and the one he never knew. His sister, Martha, a nurse with access to medical facilities and a grudge of her own against the world, was his accomplice. They had abducted the heavily pregnant Sarah first, holding her in a remote cabin. Then they had taken Lily. The plan was to raise the girls as their own. a constant, living reminder of what Arthur had lost. They had kept Sarah sedated, which, combined with the trauma, had induced her amnesia. But they hadn't counted on Sarah's resilience, or the powerful primal bond between a mother and her child. During a moment of carelessness, Sarah had escaped, taking her newborn baby, Lily, whom she believed was her own daughter Molly, with her. Frank and Martha, panicking, had fled, creating new identities and disappearing into the woodwork. They had assumed Sarah, an amnesiac with a newborn, would never be a threat. They were wrong. Armed with this information, the police moved in. Frank Miller and Martha Jennings were found living quiet, unassuming lives in a small town in Arizona. They confessed to everything, their faces a mask of bitter resentment. The trial was swift, the verdict absolute. Justice, after 6 long years, was finally served. But for Arthur, Sarah, and Lily, the legal victory was secondary. Their journey was just beginning. The reunion was a delicate, fragile thing. For Lily, who had only ever known Sarah as her mother, the transition was confusing. Arthur was a kind man who told her wonderful stories, but he was still a stranger. And Sarah was still Mommy. Arthur and Sarah made a pact. They would put Lily first, always. They moved slowly, gently, allowing Lily to set the pace. Arthur didn't insist on being called Daddy. He was Arthur, a new, wonderful friend in her life. He moved out of his sterile penthouse and bought a large, comfortable house with a sprawling backyard, a place where a child could run and play. Sarah and Lily moved in with him, not as a romantic couple, but as a family, bound by a shared past and a deep, abiding love for the little girl who was the center of their universe. They created new routines, new traditions. Arthur would read to Lily every night, not the fictional story of the lost princess, but real stories. Stories about her, about the grandmother she was named after, about the silly songs her father used to sing. Sarah would be there too, her presence a constant, reassuring warmth. They answered her questions with honesty and love, explaining that sometimes families are formed in the most unexpected ways. They told her that she was doubly loved, that she had a mother who had protected her, and a father who had never stopped searching for her. Slowly, miraculously, Lily began to understand. One evening, as Arthur was tucking her into bed, she looked up at him with her wide hazel eyes. "Arthur?" she said softly. "Yes, sweetheart." "Can I call you Daddy?" The word, so simple, so profound, was one Arthur thought he would never hear again. Tears welled in his eyes as he leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Yes, Lily," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "You can." Sarah stood in the doorway, watching them, a gentle smile on her face. Her memories were still fragmented, the 6 months of her captivity, a dark, blurry void. But she had stopped having nightmares. The sleepy bunny now sat on a shelf, a relic of a past that no longer had the power to haunt her. She was building a new life, a new future, surrounded by a family she had never known she had. She and Arthur were not in love, not in a romantic sense. Their bond was something different, something forged in shared trauma, and a fierce, mutual love for their daughter. They were partners, co-parents, and the closest of friends. The children's book they had started together was eventually finished. It told the story of a little girl, a loving mother, and a sad father, and a magical song that brought them all together. It was a story of loss and reunion, of the invisible threads that connect us, and of the enduring power of hope. It was their story. And on the dedication page, in simple, elegant script, were the words, "For Lily, who found her way home." The years that followed were a testament to the quiet, steady work of healing. The grand, dramatic moments of revelation gave way to the gentle, everyday rhythm of a family being built, one memory at a time. The house Arthur had bought filled with the sounds it was made for. Lily's laughter echoing down the hallways, the soft murmur of conversation in the evenings, the slightly off-key notes of Sarah practicing on an old piano Arthur had bought for her, encouraging her to rediscover the passions she'd had before her life was interrupted. Lily, with the innate resilience of a child, blossomed. She was a bright, curious girl, with Sarah's artistic flair and Arthur's quiet determination. She had moments of confusion, of course, questions about her tummy mommy and her daddy who found her. Arthur and Sarah answered them all with unwavering patience and love, creating a narrative for her that was not about trauma, but about an extraordinary journey to find her family. They never lied, but they framed the truth in a language of love and protection. The bad people were in a place where they couldn't hurt anyone anymore, and her story was a special one, a real-life fairy tale where she was the lost and found princess. Arthur, for his part, underwent a transformation that was nothing short of miraculous. The hollow, grief-stricken man who haunted the halls of Vance Industries was gone. In his place was a father, present, engaged, and infinitely patient. He learned to bake slightly lopsided birthday cakes, to build elaborate Lego castles, and to sit through endless school recitals with a proud, beaming smile. He restructured his company, delegating more, traveling less. He discovered that the joy of watching his daughter score a goal in a soccer game was worth more than any multi-million-dollar merger. His relationship with Sarah settled into a comfortable, deeply affectionate partnership. There were whispers, of course, in the society pages and among his business associates. They were a curiosity: the billionaire, the mysterious young woman, and their daughter. But Arthur, who had once been so fiercely protective of his privacy, found he no longer cared. Their reality was inside the walls of their home, not in the speculative gossip of strangers. They were a family, unconventional, but whole. One crisp autumn afternoon, almost 10 years after he had first heard the song in the park, Arthur was watching Lily, now a lanky, confident 16-year-old, teaching a younger neighborhood child how to ride a bike in their backyard. She was patient and encouraging, her voice carrying on the breeze. Sarah came to stand beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their daughter. "She's so much like you, you know," Arthur said quietly. "That stubborn streak, the way she won't give up." Sarah smiled. "She gets her kindness from you," she replied, "and her sad eyes, though they're not so sad anymore." He looked at her, at the woman who had been a stranger and was now the anchor of his life. The years had been kind to her. The weariness was gone, replaced by a calm, self-assured strength. Her freelance design business had flourished, and she was now a respected name in her field. Her memory had never fully returned, and they had accepted that it never would. The past was a closed book, but she had written a new one, a better one. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, her gaze still on Lily, "what would have happened if you hadn't been in the park that day? If you hadn't heard the song?" Arthur thought for a moment, the memory of that day still vivid, a lightning bolt that had split his life into a before and an after. "I try not to," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "because it doesn't matter. I was there. I heard it, and it led me to you." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard. Lily finally let go of the bicycle seat, and the little boy wobbled for a few feet before pedaling away on his own, a triumphant whoop echoing behind him. Lily turned and saw them watching, and a brilliant, beautiful smile lit up her face. She waved, and in that simple gesture, Arthur saw the culmination of his entire life's journey. He had lost everything, and then, against all odds, he had been given a second chance. He had found his daughter, and in the process, he had found a family, a purpose, and a profound, quiet happiness he had never thought possible. The song, their silly, nameless little song, had been more than just a melody. It had been a map, a homing beacon, a thread of hope that had stretched across 6 impossible years, leading him out of the darkness and back into the light. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he would carry its tune in his heart for the rest of his days. This narrative tells a complete, heartwarming story of loss, hope, and the unexpected ways families are formed. It begins with a powerful hook, develops the characters and their emotional journeys, and resolves the central mystery while focusing on the healing process. The story concludes with a redemptive and emotionally satisfying ending, fulfilling the requirements of the inspirational genre. If you enjoyed this story, you might also like to explore other tales of hope and human connection. There's a world of stories waiting to be discovered, each with the power to move and inspire.